Now I would like to show the game that I won in the last Chess Olympiad against Paraguayan Grandmaster Axel Bachmann, and I won that game using so-called wrong tactics. Okay, during the game I thought that everything was okay about the tactics that I played, and only afterwards I got really surprised when checking it with the computer that not everything was as good as I thought. Okay, no, it's a normal case for chess player, but even this case was not typical in that sense, because I played what I thought was completely right idea, and what we have already seen in the game Markovsky against Smirin, but it turned out that the slight difference in the position would play a very important role if my opponent defended correctly. Okay, so he played c4, e5, knight c3, knight c6. So I'm trying to set up a King's Indian type of play by later playing g6, bishop g7. So g3, g6, bishop g2, bishop g7, d3, d6. And now my opponent here played rook b1, so he wanted to play relatively quickly b4. Okay, I played a5, so a3, and I played f5. Here I expected my opponent to play b4 immediately, but I cannot say that I was going to do anything special against that. I was just going to change pawns and continue my development with knight f6. The feeling was that opening the a file would be in black's favor at the very end, because when black creates some play on the king side, white would not have much time to create counterplay on the queen side. So it's similar like in Ruy Lopez, for example, in that Breyer defense. Meanwhile, if white at some moment would be on the defensive on the king side, then I can use the a file for my rook and maybe even create stronger attack. But okay, that's not a concrete observation. This is just general hope, not even a general plan. In any case, my opponent played something different now, so he played e4. He decided not to play b4 immediately. So knight f6, knight g2, short castle, short castle. And here I got very much influenced by that old game Markovsky against Smirin, that I started comparing that game to this position. Well, first of all, were with the reversed colors, because in that game white played f5. Now I'm thinking about this move f4. So what's the difference? When you have a reversed color, it means that you have one tempo less. But white spent this tempo for this move rook a1, b1. I was trying to calculate some approximate variations, and I thought, well, it's not such a big deal. Of course, it would be better for me if rook were on a1, like if I were playing white, but the difference is not dramatic. And then the second difference of that instead of having pawns on a2 and a7, we are now having them on a5 and a3. And of course, during the game, I thought, no, this cannot be a big problem either. Can you imagine that exactly because of this fact that the pawns are not a2 and a7, but rather on a3 and a5, this whole sacrifice of this pawn is not sound. I can even say that it's incorrect. So now this is what would be right tactics with pawns a2 and a7 becomes wrong tactics now. Fortunately, my opponent during the game didn't notice it either. He took on h4, I played knight h5. Then he himself remembered that Markovsky-Smirin game, and got very upset. He thought that he got caught. And then he played knight d5. Well, as we know that Smirian in a similar situation would take the pawn. Okay, if d takes, and then play like this. But okay, this move we are not going even to consider seriously. After knight f4, it's clear that black is better. So the question is, what about other moves? And it turns out that the move knight d5, which in Markovsky's Smirian game would be wrong, well, in that case it was knight d4, because of this, knight d4, knight takes. Here, actually, this knight on d5 is perfectly justified. Black is threatening c6, so all white needs to do is to play c5 in order, after c6, to have the knight on b6. And with this difference, white gets a better game. So, because later on white will exchange knight for his bishop and also be in time to play f4. So after c5, white is basically already threatening f4. Okay, black of course can play bishop e6, but this is already not exactly what black was aiming for. So again, white can play f4. So it's, well, and after this, white would have some advantage. If the pawns were like this, then of course c6, c5 move would not lead to anything, because black would play c6 anyway, knight b4, bishop e5, controlling the f4 square. But as I said, I got lucky that my opponent did not notice this detail either, and here after some thought, he played knight d5 immediately, because he thought that black's idea is against knight d5 to play knight d4, but then after taking he would have some move f5 and probably having a more or less equal game after c6. Well, even f6 is probably quite okay. Knight takes f6, knight takes, bishop takes f4. Well, it's a normal position from the English opening, where white can actually even hope to be slightly better in the future. So, but I was not thinking about giving him slight advantage or even equality. And therefore, in this position, I started thinking about exchange sacrifice. Okay, this sacrifice is no longer the wrong sacrifice. So finally, wrong tactics are over in this game. Now good tactics start. So I took on f4, knight takes f4. Just a little correction, because I took with the pawn. It would be absolutely the same to take with the knight, because after knight takes f4, knight takes f4, bishop would take on f4. And now, in order to justify the whole pawn sacrifice, I also have to sacrifice the exchange. So rook takes f4, knight takes f4, queen h4. And here it's a very interesting position. My opponent saw that although he has an exchange and pawn more, he is in a certain danger. And then he thought he found the way to make a forced draw, and he was happy with this. So he played knight e2. Meanwhile, he had a stronger move in this position, which would be knight d5. But it's also a move which requires more calculation. During the game, I thought that I would just answer it with bishop g4, and I would be nearly winning, because white doesn't have, then I just give bishop d4 check, king h1, bishop e5, threatening mate. f4 is now impossible because I win the queen, and h3 would also lead to a quick mate or material losses after bishop takes h3. But then the question is where white can go. White cannot go to e1, I think, because then black plays a very nice blocking combination bishop f3, just to block the pawn from going to f4. After bishop takes f3, bishop e5, rook is also blocked on f1, so queen takes h2 mate is inevitable. Black can try to play queen e3, sorry, white can try to play queen e3, but black continues with this blocking stuff, so first bishop e5 of course, and then after h3, knight d4. So f3 square is very important. For example, now knight e2 is threatening queen h3 mate, but after bishop takes f3, queen takes h3, black wins as well, and also threatening mate on h2 or threatening to take the bishop on f3. And finally, I have to mention that if white tries to defend from those threats like playing rook f1, black just brings another piece into the attack. Once again, all the pieces are participating in the attack. That means that king has no defense. So this was about queen e1, but white could also play queen d2. And here the position would be very unclear. Knight d4, f3, bishop e5, h3, bishop takes h3. Okay, to make further analysis would require more time. I can just say that black has enough compensation for the exchange, but it's not yet the winning attack. So after takes, queen g2, king h5, according to the analysis, white goes king f2, then king e3, and then plan is f4. Meanwhile, black is also trying to do something, and at the end, the chances are equal. Wow, it's typical for the amazing game of chess. So I set up the position. So as I said, Axel in the game played knight e2 instead of knight d5, which was probably stronger. Now, so the bishop. So as I said, instead of knight d5, Axel played knight e2, but knight d5 was probably stronger. So after knight e2, I play bishop g4, and now after f3, bishop e5, h3, bishop takes h3, black's attack would be nearly decisive. So that's why Axel chose to play h3 first, and this was actually his plan. So after I have to take on h3, and he plays knight f4. Now if I play queen h6, white goes queen g4 and has things relatively under control, also an exchange up. So I decided I better should play queen h4, attacking the knight. Now knight has to go to g2, because queen f3 loses immediately. Queen knight d4, and then queen takes f4, and of course two pieces against rook win easily. well, bishop queen f4, knight e2 check. And so that's why knight g2 is the only move. Here at first I thought I did not have anything better than repeating the position, so I played queen h3. My opponent played knight f4, queen h4, knight g2. And here I thought once again, maybe 15-20 minutes, and decided that although objectively I might be not really much better, but I'm definitely not worse if I don't repeat the position. I have enough compensation for the exchange. And then I felt confident that I could play well in the rest of the game. So although I was not sure whether I was going to win, but at least I knew that I shouldn't make the draw immediately. So I played queen h6. Very interesting position. White has an extra exchange, it's his move. Pawn structure is okay, king is relatively protected, but black's initiative is very strong. It's because of the bishop and the control over dark squares, nothing else. So queen g4, at least defending from bishop e5, so white has queen h4. So now rook f8, activating the rook, queen h4, queen d2. And now he played rook bd1, which is probably a mistake, but I must say that white's position is already rather difficult in many other variations too. For example, rook fd1, I play queen e2, and after rook e1 I can already take the pawn. So, and normally in such positions, if I get two pawns, then I will also have a little material advantage, because a bishop and two pawns will be stronger than the rook. So okay, rook bd1, queen takes b2, and now I think Axel Bachmann made more or less the decisive mistake. He went after my pawn on b7, thinking that like this he would also activate his rook. That was the wrong decision. He needed to immediately activate his pieces to the maximum with knight e3. Then he would keep almost equal chances after queen takes e3, knight d5. Well, I still have a feeling that the prospects of black are better because of the strong a pawn, but I have to admit that the knight is now already strong on d5, so it's quite possible that white can achieve equal game on a later stage. So knight e3 was the real chance for Axel, but after rook b1, queen takes e3, rook takes b7, it's black's activity that is decisive. So I played knight d4, threatening knight f3 check. So knight e1, having the knight so passive on e1 is not the same as having it on d5. So okay, here I played quietly, I played queen c5, knowing that my position is just superior. So king g2, queen c6, rook b1, a4. So finally the a pawn will decide the game. I have very active pieces, I can try to attack my opponent's king, but at the moment he's also concentrated with his pieces on the king's side, so he has forces to defend the king. He has queen, rook, knight, but he has no pieces to keep an eye on my pawn, because the only piece to keep an eye on my passed pawn is rook, but the square on a1 is controlled by bishop on g7, and therefore it's the pawn that finally discoordinates white's pieces and decides the game. So it was f4, a3, rook f2. So as I said, there was only one rook keeping an eye on the pawn, so white tries to activate the other rook on f2, but after queen f8, a8, rook has to go to a2, otherwise the pawn will promote. And just what I said 3 minutes ago, white had enough pieces defending his king, queen and rook. But now knight e6 and the pawn falls. So white goes rook b3, knight takes f4, king h1, and bishop b2. Little tactics that decides the game. Probably Axel thought he could take my bishop with the rook and take my queen. But after rook takes a8, he cannot prevent my pawn from queening. Okay. And otherwise, I'm just going to come with my queen to a4. And okay, there are many ways for black now to win this. So Axel played knight c2, trying to attack the a3 pawn, but I'm coming with my queen to a4. And he went knight a1, trying to defend this rook. But now I took on d3. And he resigned because, after rook takes d3, queen takes c4, black attacks both rooks, also king gets mated in some variations, like for example after rook h3, queen f1, king f2, rook f2, king h2, rook f2, and okay, white either loses material or gets mated. Okay, what can I say about this game? Finally, the same ideas in the game Markovsky-Smirin worked very well, and I could win an interesting game. But still it was interesting to establish that that in this particular game the idea of sacrificing the pawn on a4 was not so sound because of the fact that white had a pawn on a3, black had a pawn on a5, and the b6 square was weak. Okay, so chess is such a complicated game that you have to pay attention to every detail, sometimes a very little detail. But okay, I'm still happy that the game finished well for me.